Paper all week. We're doing some book bindings. These are some of the books that we just made. And
we made the paper too.
Yeah, they made the paper, and then once the paper was dry, they made the book. Yeah, these are pieces that we made actually about almost 2 years ago. And these were made in response to the different riots and revolts that were happening around the world in 2011, 2012. It seemed like every city, every major city had some kind of uprising happening. And so we were showcasing those by using images from the various steps. And so I can show you guys the process of how we make the paper if you'd like to see. It's right over here. What we do is we actually start off with clothing, cut it up into little pieces, and we process it in a machine called a Hollander beater that transforms textiles into pulp for paper making. And the machine was invented in 1680. Ours are completely portable, and so before people made paper out of trees, they would make paper out of old rags, and so that's what we do. But we like to use materials that have some kind of significance to the communities that we're working with. We've had individuals bring in their own clothing that has, sentimentality, and they've gone through the process of making that into paper.
Traditional hand paper making has been around for a long time, so the idea of taking rags to make pulp is an old concept. It's been around since 100 AD. I studied paper making in my undergrad as a part of my printmaking studies, and got into one of the first things I did was go home and started pulling all my clothes out of the closet and cutting them up and making paper out of it. And then I saw that I could use my clothing that has a personal connection. And when I was younger, my father was killed in a car accident. And so when I went home on break, I was able to ask my family what they thought about cutting up some of his clothing, and pulping it, and printing his drawings and his architectural designs and his poetry and stuff on that. And so I did that. My family, we sat around and cut up his clothing and engaged in this conversation about what life was like living without a father. So it really became a celebration of like my mother more than anything. So we were all sharing, she was sharing stories about him and how they met, and things that we had never. And when I finished my undergraduate experience, I started a paper making studio in Burlington, Vermont. So it's about this size, and I started teaching paper making. And one of the folks that came through my paper making workshops was a veteran named Drew Cameron, and he essentially brought down his military uniform and said, I want to transform this into paper. And so we cut that up, pulped it, and then he made over 350 sheets of paper with his one uniform. And he started sharing it with all his friends who were veterans all over the United States, who he served with, veterans who were still deployed, veterans who were incarcerated. And the next thing we knew, we had veterans showing up from all over with their uniforms wanting to engage in this process. And so almost overnight, we formed the Combat Paper Project, which essentially is veterans coming together to cut up their uniforms, to share their experience, and through the art and craft of paper making. So we, in 2007, founded the Combat Paper Project and started traveling all over the United States, working specifically with veterans. And so this kind of grew out of this growing demand to basically bring paper making to other populations, not just veterans. And so we were able to kind of create piece paper as a way to kind of broaden the mission for what we do. The Piece Paper Project is a collaboration between art therapists and social activists and artists. And so Margaret and myself and other team members travel around the world working with different populations affected by trauma, in direct collaborations with art therapists, activists, and other artists. And so what we do is we bring our portable hand paper making studio to these communities, and we set up shop and allow these populations to come together and bring in something that has personal significance as it relates to their traumatic experience. And then working with the art therapists and the other community members, they cut up the material, they grind it into pulp, and then they reform it into sheets of paper. In this way, individuals are allowed to kind of like take something that has a negative impact on their life. The experience has a negative impact, so something that's symbolic of that negative impact, and transform it into something that marks not necessarily something positive, maybe more something like marking a new beginning and a path to recovery. Yeah. And then we travel abroad every year. We try to go abroad for 3 months, and in again, responding to different requests. So last year we were in the United Kingdom and Spain. The work we did was in the United Kingdom, like I described, working with survivors of the Troubles. The year before that, we were in Turkey, and so we were asked by the mayor of Istanbul to come to Turkey and train orphans and refugees how to make traditional Islamic paper. And so we worked with them to design a studio, and they built the studio, and then we traveled there and we trained the orphans at their orphan school, and then we also trained the artistic directors, and the calligraphers, and the marblers how to make paper. So paper was a huge cultural thing in Turkey for hundreds of years, but since 1918 it's kind of disappeared with the industrial practices, and so the orphans are the ones now carrying the torch forward. So that's kind of examples of what we do. This year we're headed to Poland. We're doing a series of workshops that start in Berlin and to Warsaw, down to Krakow, and kind of back. And so we're working with different organizations and different artists, and some of it is surrounding the issues of the Holocaust. So we custom build every one of our workshops based on what the community is interested in, what kind of other resources we have access to, who's going to attend as a leader and stuff like that. So we try to activate the paper in more ways than just creating it. So the last thing we want people to do is to take something, an article of clothing out of the closet, and cut it up and have this cathartic experience, and then take that paper and put it back in the closet and never do anything with it. So we do a lot of bookbinding, we do a lot of creative writing, we do a lot of printmaking. Sometimes we do mandala making, mask making, things like that. So we try to use the paper in a way that activates it. And we encourage our participants to share their paper with their friends and their family and their community as a way to kind of like engage in the conversation about their new beginning or their new path.
Well, we started this project called Panty Pulping in 2012, and for me it was a response to sexual assault I experienced. And I've been traveling in Istanbul, Turkey when this happened, and I was there in residency for 3 months, but it was just the second week that we were there when this happened. So I had to figure out a way to be able to manage my stress at the time. And since we help so many people use their, the vehicle of paper making as a form of trauma therapy, I looked to paper making for myself as a way to make something positive out of this situation, or just a little better than what it was at the time. And I realized that the one fiber that I had the most complicated relationship with that moment was underwear. And so I thought it would be interesting to see what happened if I cut up underwear and turned it into. So when I got back to the United States, I invited a lot of my friends to come to the studio in Vermont where Drew and I were working previously. It's the studio that he started. It's where I first learned hand paper making. Just a really comfortable place. So I invited my friends to come down and bring some underwear to pulp. And at first they were like, "What are you talking about? Like, you want me to bring underwear? What is this?" And but then what happened was everybody had their own relationship with the material. Obviously, the underwear is one of the most personal things that we wear. But everybody had their own reason for pulping. And so I envisioned the project operating with like 15 people, kind of behind closed doors, just because of the nature of what people were pulping. And then we were invited by St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa, to do a public panty pulping event. And I thought that was a little bit wild, like the idea of actually pulping underwear in public. I didn't know how it would hold the intention of the project to be, bring people together against it. When envisioning a public panty pulping workshop, I was nervous that people would walk by and see the words panty pulping and they would be like, "Oh, what's going on?" and like it could have a negative response. But it ended up really working out in our favor because people would stop and say, "What is this?" And then that would sort of draw them in, and we would be able to say, this is a workshop that we're doing. All the people that are participating here support consent culture on campus, and you're invited to sign this pledge of nonviolence. And that's always the first step of the panty pulping workshop, is to sign a pledge. It says, by participating in this process, I'm making a vow to myself and my community to use my power to promote peace and to prevent violence in thoughts. And then the nature of the workshop also changed because we had people come in and they actually brought clothing that they had worn while they were raped. And I wasn't anticipating that, and it was really a surprise. We were sitting around the table and the first woman shared that this was the clothing that she wore when she had been raped 20 years ago. And she's like, I don't know why I'm still holding this stuff, but I want to move on from it. And at that moment, I looked to the art therapist sitting to my left, and I was like, oh my gosh, you don't have any plans today, right? Because I'm going to need you here. And so she stuck around, and people actually had a very therapeutic experience. So you can see that panic pumping works well in public as a social action piece, but also we can do stuff behind closed doors, working with people who experience sexual violence or domestic violence. I think statistically, when we're set up on the street, we're always going to be coming into contact, unfortunately, with people who've lived through something like that. I think last time I checked, the statistic was 1 in 3 women who experience sexual or domestic violence in their lifetime. And so that's 1 billion people on this planet, essentially. So statistically, we're going to be coming into contact with some people. Yeah, I got an email from a college student a couple weeks ago, and she was just like, she told me that this was the first time when she's actually been able to make art about the fact that she was raped. And it's not something that she shared with me in the workshop, it's something that she shared with me via email afterwards. And I just thought it was so interesting because she felt that she was making her own personal artwork about the fact that she was raped, but she was also, she's in fact using the text and images that we had chosen. But that was what she needed in order to share this. She said she called her mom right afterwards and told her all about it. It gave her a sense of creativity when thinking about this often and it happened. So she's hoping that she can move on now that she's made peace.